What's up, y'all? My name is T. Shaw, and this is Brewin Black Podcast, where the contents we serve you is authentic, vulnerable, and relatable. That means we serve you with no cream and no sugar.
I guess I like my coffee black.
Yo, 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 what's going on? This is your man, Scholar P, pronouns he, him, his.
And it's your boy T. Shaw, pronouns he, him, his.
And this is Brewin Black, giving you all the latest in black news and entertainment for our intellectuals, our millennials, and those who like their information like we like our news. Black. How you feeling, T?
Bro, it's been a good week. I have no complaints. I just feel blessed. I think I'm in a good state. But yeah, how you doing?
I'm good. I feel exhausted, but in a good way. Like I've really been grinding, putting in the work on my dreams and goals. And not only am I seeing it, people around me that I care about are seeing it too. And so that's really the big dream for real.
Rock with it. I rock with it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So before we get into our episode, we got to do our land acknowledgments. So this is the land of the Gabrielino and the Tongva. This is stolen land. This is colonized land, and we will always, always, always pay those respects.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we're about to jump into a segment called our espresso shots, just where we give quick acknowledgments of things that have been going on in the world. And we just want to say, rest in peace to Michael K. Williams. For those of you who don't know, this man has been playing awesome, incredible, deep roles in the acting business for years, probably decades. I remember he was, in The Wire as Omar. He was one of the fathers of the Central Park Five and When They See Us, Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. He was in the black sci-fi
Lovecraft Country.
Lovecraft Country as another father figure. And it's so crazy. He had his struggles with particular addictions, and it's just so sad to see because he had such a great impact on our society. And I was listening to other podcasts and people were talking about his impact in Jersey. He was talking in churches when Eric Gardner died or was murdered, and he was just a sweet soul. So we're very sad to see him go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, his passing definitely inspired me to even start The Wire. Like I've heard so many great things. It's a lot of people I know's favorite show, right? And I've seen a few episodes with my mom, but growing up. So I wanted to dive into it, and I just finished season 1, and I got to tell you, it's 10 out of 10. I'm very excited. I think that he was a phenomenal actor for those same roles you just talked about, Scholar P. But his acting on The Wire as Omar is just phenomenal. Dog is phenomenal. Like he really encapsulates the character. And just reading about his story, he talks about how he started, like the line started to become blurred. He said he started to embody like Omar is his like everyday person. And that fueled with like that helped fuel his addiction. And he was just kind of discussing like how when those lines start to get blurred, that like as an artist you struggle. And I know he reached out to HBO for counseling and rehab. So I just it really made me think about just the struggle of artists and actors, and being able to separate yourself from that like persona and that alter ego. But one more thing that really just stood out to me was like his last Instagram post. I want to play it real quick. He shared a clip of what's my man name? Tracy Morgan. After his accident, he came onto the Breakfast Club. So I want to play that real quick, and just kind of leave y'all with this prophetic feeling that I got from him.
Don't cry for me. Okay, I had a misfortune accident. Don't cry for me. Cry for others, man. My grandmother told me when you think you doing bad, there's always somebody out there worse. Right. There's people out there in the world with nobody love. Nobody love them. How about that? What is happiness? What is happiness? but it's happiness. Whatever you think it is wrong. It's simpler than that. It's way simpler than that. You know what true happiness is? Having something to look forward to.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just real. It's like that's the final message he left us with, and I think that that's deep. That it hit me, so I wanted to leave y'all with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and once again, shout out to Michael K. Williams and his legacy. And he spent his life, really touching and impacting others. And so
Mhm,
they always say when you enter the world, people smile and you cry.
mhm.
And now when you
Let's
die, he can smile while we cry and
mhm.
we mourn and celebrate him simultaneously. So rest in peace to Michael K. Williams. Now, going off of our espresso shots, we have to get into something known as our light roast.
Ah,
So, for those of you who don't know, light roast is when we critique someone or something in society that deserves it. And sometimes we can give constructive feedback and criticism, but sometimes there's no love lost. And this
mhm,
week we are talking about the Caitlyn Jenner, who said that she agrees with Texas' right to do whatever they want to as an independent state, but
mhm,
she does not agree with the abortion ban laws in general. And we're here to say, look, Caitlyn Jenner, the rights of states wanting to do their own thing is what can make America so dangerous. States wanting to have their own laws and the way they run things sometimes and in many cases can be detrimental to a lot of minoritized and oppressed groups in our society and nation, because every state has its own particular history, has its
mhm.
own particular desires and needs. And of course not everything can apply to every state. States have geographical differences, climate differences and things of that nature. However, when it comes to humanity and human rights, that shouldn't be something that states get to dictate
Big
state
fact.
by state. There should be national mandates and rules that we all follow, because there should be rules that apply to all human beings. But T, what
Yeah.
do you think about that situation?
Yeah, bro. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like historically, states' rights has never been kind nor fair to minoritized populations, right? We think about the Civil War, like that was a war fought over what? States' rights. Their right to what? Keep slaves, right? They saw slaves as the crux and the cornerstone of their economy, and that it was their right to kind of go about it how they wanted to. We can think about COVID, right? Like that's a states' rights issue. And we look at states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas. The people in those states, we just talked about the Texas lieutenant governor, right? Talking about how their COVID rates is black people fault. But because of their states' rights approach, we know again who's being affected the most. So I just want y'all to think about historically when people are invoking states' rights, like who is being targeted and how are they being targeted, right? Who's truly being affected? So in this situation, like it's women. Women are the minoritized population in this. And specifically, I want us to think about Black women in general, right? Because it's also a class issue. Like if you don't have money, the people that are truly affected by this abortion ban in Texas are going to be people that don't have money, that can't afford to go out of state to get an abortion. Texas's abortion laws are already very strict and stringent, and I think that the most evil part about this actual abortion law too is the fact that they're deputizing their citizens to invoke the law, which is kind of crazy. They're empowering citizens. So if you know someone that is getting an abortion, you can take them to court if they've gotten an abortion after, I believe, what was it, the 4 or 6 week mark. If you know someone that got an abortion after that, you can sue not only the person getting the abortion, but you also can sue the facility that did it. So of course there's a incentive. There's literally an incentive for you to snitch, right?
Mm.
And that's how, rather than having the government enforce it, they're having their citizenship kind of turn on each other, right? And to again, this deputization, right? Like you're empowering people to be vigilantes and take justice into their own hands. And if you put money on it, everybody need money. So it's like, of course, the people that can't afford it, that can't even imagine being sued, are the people that are going to be affected the most. And it's going to increase poverty. And it's like, again, just controlling women's bodies. So again, when we talk about states' rights, I need us to think about like who is truly being affected and targeted.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you know, like we were saying before, there's so many structural issues, like this idea of like being sued and like your nosy neighbor who has particular rights feeling like, oh, if I take you to court, I can save that baby's life, even though I'm destroying and helping deconstruct the life of someone who is literally right in front of me and who's not bothering me. Right. And so I think that it's something that we have to pay attention to. And for our audience, it's just super important to know that, like, when we talk about states' rights, we're not saying that all states are the exact same, but when it comes to basic human rights, like we shouldn't have any control over what a woman does with her body. I shouldn't even have control over what another man does with his body. You know what I mean? Like I wish you would tell me, hey, Ashley, I don't think you should eat that or go work out there because you know, of my religious beliefs. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like what? Like, so I think that we have to understand that like human rights shouldn't be something that states get to dictate place by place. Like those aren't how the rules are played. So Caitlyn Jenner, we hope you get that through your head and you start speaking in ways that uplift women, especially since you are one. So
Scholar P,
yeah.
would you mind if I jumped in here? So I have a question.
Yeah.
I think this is a good opportunity to kind of break this down for our audience. How is this different than like a state saying that you have to get vaccinated or that you have to wear a mask? How would you differentiate that? Because you said you would hate for somebody to tell you how you should live your life, right? I think people are taking this same approach and trying to stretch it and be like, okay, this is the same reason we shouldn't wear masks, or this is the same reason we shouldn't have to get a vaccination. How are those things different for you?
Well, I mean, one is actually impacting other people's lives, right?
Mhm.
So like, and we can also talk about this idea of like open carry gun laws and things like that. Like me carrying a gun and knowing I can carry it anywhere, anytime without any sorts of without any type of license, without any sort of mental health wellness check or anything like that. I have the power, and you can look at all the mass shootings in America to corroborate this. I have the power to impact someone else's life. But if a woman down the street wants to terminate a pregnancy or wants to transition herself from a pregnancy, it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with me. It impacts my life in no way, shape, or form. Now, as someone who has COVID, as someone who had COVID, I'm free. I'm free. As someone who had COVID, I could have gone out to clubs, out to restaurants, out in super public places, and gotten thousands of people sick. Right. So some things that happen that, you know, some parts of your life, they impact other people, whether you want them to or not. So when we talk about a mask or a vaccine, you being sick and you being infectious and contagious could impact other people, whether you want it to or not. Right. No part of a woman down the street being pregnant is going to impact any part of my life, no matter what she ends up doing with that baby. That's her business. But when I'm sick and I'm going out to where everyone else is, when I'm infected and I'm going out to where everyone else is, it becomes everyone else's business, whether they want it to be or not. And that's the main difference.
Big facts. Thank you for knocking that one out the park, bro. I just saw an opportunity and I was like, I think this is a great place to like really hit the nail on the head. And you did just that.
Absolutely, brother. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, man. I appreciate you so much. But you know what? Speaking of taking shots at people, all right, we got to get into the Certified Lover Boy album. All right. So for those of you who don't know, Drake, Drizzy, Aubrey Graham and them, OVO and all them, they dropped that Certified Lover Boy album. And of course, you know, Donda had dropped and he was taking some shots at Ye. And I think that there was something interesting about this album. I appreciated a few of the songs, but I think that there was possibly even something lost with them going back and forth at each other so much versus, you know, the magic that was made when Drake pieced it up with Meek Mill and they made Going Crazy, or when he pieced it up with Chris Brown and they made No Guidance. And so, T, what do you think about that that collaboration piece and like what we might have lost when these two titans went at each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least with the album, my initial impression, or honestly for both, just like last week, I told you, like, I was a bit underwhelmed. I think when, at least my hard rule for any music that I consume is like based on the amounts of tracks on the album, I feel like there has to be about between 40 and 60 like consumable songs. So if you're dropping an album with 25 songs, I need at least 12, you feel me? It's just being mass produced. And I think that that's the trend that feel like a lot of artists are taking, right? That they're just putting out a bunch of songs and kind of throwing anything at the wall and hoping that it sticks. But I do think the cool thing about Drake's music is that it is consumable for a lot of different people. A lot of people listen to Drake for different reasons. A lot of people will look at those 25 songs and we will all have different songs, like different favorite songs. But when it comes down to the beef, I do think that something was lost. Like the album is called Certified Lover Boy, and from my impression of that, I thought it was going to be something of an R&B album. But I think that the tone of the album was very like kind of calculated and aimed at Kanye in a lot of different ways. We know 7 a.m. was a direct shot at him. I really enjoyed that song. But I feel like a lot of the album didn't really fit the theme that it was going for. And I also came across this Kyrie Irving like tweet, and I thought it was kind of interesting. He was just talking about how we always have to have expert hot takes and comparisons of people. And when we do things like that, we're not able to appreciate like what makes something individually great. When you're comparing it, like if you're saying, oh, this versus that, then we always heard that the comparison is the thief of joy. So that's something I thought of, and I tried to kind of like take myself out of the realm of like, oh, Donda versus Certified Lover Boy. But I think again, even in that, they did something wrong in both of those. So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel, I'm going to go based off what you just said, right? I think that, when Drake had his issues with Push, like he was in an interview with LeBron and he said, you know what, I could take all that crazy energy, make another crazy diss song and do X, Y, and Z, but I don't like the way that would sort of sit with my legacy.
Yeah.
And so what he did was he ended up making 2 or 3 like more hit songs, and it was a vibe. And of course, over time, people didn't even really care that much about the Pusha T stuff anymore, and like everyone just sort of kept it moving. And I think with this Kanye stuff, it's very much focused on, all right, Kanye's just as big as me. I got something to prove. I'm gonna go at him. He's gonna go at me, and it is what it is because we're both superstars at this point. And so I think that, like you said, something can be lost. Like even Andre 3000, having that verse on Donda, right? And it was supposed to be an ode to Kanye's moms. You know what I'm saying? And you're using odes to your moms to like attack someone else. And Drake is talking about, hey, pull up at my address, even though he's a certified lover boy. And it's just like, you're women, you're the audience of women that you care about don't even want to hear you talk about, pulling up and beefing. Like they want you to sing to them and rap about them. You know what I'm saying? Talk about the Wi-Fi. You know what I'm saying? Like, and the friends and them not liking their own friends that they're telling you about. You know what I'm saying? Like, give us more quotables. You know what I'm saying? So, now I do like Poppy's Home. That one is good. That one is good. So I'm not. So definitely some joints.
Right? It feels like it fits the theme of the album. And I think that what was missing. Like, even though that wasn't really one of my favorite songs, it feels like it belongs on that album as compared to maybe a 7 a.m. And I don't know, Drake has a shot or two every once in a while, but I feel like, just like you said, because it wasn't really like, I don't know, it wasn't thematic to me. And I think that's what we really lost in thinking about that 3 Stacks verse. Like, that's something we really did lose. Like, because of beef, like this song that is so raw and genuine and real that you expect from 3 Stacks was meshed in with like Kanye just kind of talking head, like talking mess. And it's like, it not only is an ode to like Kanye's mom, but it's an ode to 3 Stacks mom too, and his dad, right? It's a real raw reflection on life and like the things and people that you've lost and things that you wish you could say. And I feel like that is as Kanye is now a man of God, right? Like I think that would have made more sense rather than the direction he kind of took that song in. So I do think that there's a lot of things that's lost. Not only like as viewers we lose this, but I think that like we lose a bit. I think a bit of our humanity, and things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it's crazy because we had the controversy about Donda, and I was here last week saying I cannot listen to Donda. We talked about, you know, our feelings about you listening and me not listening, and
Mhm.
because of all the controversy about Kanye. But
Yeah,
Certified Lover Boy, you know, and I don't know if it's the energy of the beef or what, but all of that controversy is also in Drake's camp. And one of the reasons it's in Drake's camp is because R. Kelly was given a writing credit, right?
yeah,
And as we know, R. Kelly is a super menace to not only the black community, but in particular, young black women.
absolutely.
And was a terrorist, for lack of a better
Yeah,
word.
decades.
And yeah, right. And he was protected for years. There was a
Mhm.
structure of protection around him. And even as Surviving R. Kelly and stuff has come out, people are still saying, you know, kidnap me, R. Kelly abused me, and things of that nature. So he's still a force to be reckoned with. And
Mhm.
so there's been a lot of criticism around him having a writing credit on Drake's Certified Lover Boy album. And, you know, here at Brewin Black, we talk about these things, but we also want to bring in the voices of experts who have dedicated their lives to not only talking about these issues, but illuminating and shining a light on why these issues are so important and pertinent in today's society. And so, right now, if you will allow us, we want to bring on a very special guest. All right. We have Dr. Charles H. Davis, H.F. Davis, the third. And he is a third generation educator. And he is a creative who is committed to the lives, love, and liberation of everyday Black people. All right. He's currently an assistant professor in the Center for the Study of Higher Ed and Post-Secondary Education at the University of Michigan, where his work broadly focuses on the issues of race, racism, and resistance in education and society. Okay. Now, as a creative, he primarily uses his photography and film to explore the materiality of Black culture and the socio-political lives of everyday Black people in the U.S. and abroad. Now, he's also an organizer and the founder and director for the Scholars for Black Lives Collective, which serves on the board of the BLD-PWR and considers Black Lives Matter Los Angeles his actual political home. And so, Dr. Davis, we want to welcome you to the show. Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much. Yeah, you and I actually had the pleasure of meeting on the Tammy Mack late night show, and this brother was giving us all the great info on the history of blacks in higher education and some of the current issues that we still deal with. And so, just such an honor to have you. You know, we had a very, very great intro, but I want to give you a chance to tell people things that the intro might not have even caught. Like, what do you want the people to know about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, and foremost, TP, appreciate y'all for holding the space and letting a brother jump on. I think, these are the insurgent and maroonage kind of educational spaces that we have to take up, seriously, the labor of contributing to the liberation of our people. So, I just am always thankful for the opportunity to get on board and to just be invited into a space ever. So I just want to, extend my appreciation for that. Yeah, I mean, I actually am in maybe a fortunate position where, unlike many situations, right, especially as scholars and the sort of like ego that comes along with that, right? And I know we were just talking about like, Ye and Drake, and I think there's some parallels we could draw between intellectual, right, and creative egos in that space, especially for Black men. But I think the bio, was perfectly fine, and part of that, for me, was wanting to write into the record a version of myself that I actually thought was legitimate and real, right? And so like, there's often this deference that's paid to scholars and PhD holders in a certain kind of way. that I think only feeds the ego. And so me trying to sort of check myself in these moments where you can have all the superlatives and all this other stuff, right? But like what humanizes you and want to communicate that. And I think if there's anything that I would hope folks derive from, you know, the bio that you shared, and to be sure you read it exactly as I wrote it. So your check is in the mail, brother. You know, it's just, you know, I'm you know, more or less just I'm a regular nigga like everybody else. And I understand the world sees and treats me as such. And so to consider myself as a better black, if you will, that some people might in this space, is only in service to white supremacy.
That's a bar.
Absolutely. Jeez. Well, I want to start this off too by saying, like, you come off, because you are such a genuine person, a down-to-earth person, a person that chooses to humanize yourself before, you know, talking about all your you know, credentials, even though you have plenty, right? So we know who we're dealing with from a professional standpoint, and we respect that. But we love also how you say, hey, look, I'm a regular nigga like everybody else. Just doing my part, knowing what my role is, and you know, so sort of stepping in that 1,000%, right? And so I mentioned that because, you know, one of the, you know, most human elements is like expressing your thoughts, right? And being willing and vulnerable enough to express your thoughts, especially on places like social media. And this is where this all sort of starts, right? Because I saw a great tweet, and me and T Shaw, we had been talking, and other people in our lives had seen the tweet going around. And so it's this idea that your thoughts were actually connecting with people. And so I'm going to pull it up, and I'm going to allow you to read it. And I want you to sort of tell us what prompted you to make that, and sort of break that down for our audience, if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure.
All righty. Let's see here. All right. So, all right. Everybody see it?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, Dr. Davis, if you will read your tweet, and then I'll hit the next button when you're ready to go to the second one.
For sure. Yeah. So I wrote, between Ye bringing out the baby and Marilyn Manson, and Drake knowingly sampling and listing R. Kelly as a writer, and all of us black men who continue to disregard these actions as insignificant or quote unquote not that deep, it's no wonder we can't get free as a people. And so we prioritize the well-being of black women and girls, femmes, trans, and non-binary folks, including their psychological safety, which is undermined every time we legitimize and prop up their abusers. Black lives will always be vulnerable, and we will never be free.
Ooh,
Real.
Jeez. Okay, so will you walk us through what inspired this particular tweet?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think our generation of scholars, you know, exists in a hyper-mediated society, not one that we are like passively a part of, but we are deeply integrated into, right? So like even for yourselves, you know, as scholars in your own right, even in the graduate school space, that, you know, we live lives that exist within and beyond the academy, and we are connected and always, you know, sort of engaged with the popular moment. Right. In many ways, it speaks to our lived experiences beyond the one dimension often, right, that academia sort of says you have to operate in, which is largely about being respectable. So, you know, within that context, I'm always sort of just trying to keep attuned to what's happening. And as I'm, you know, getting older, it's partly just to be in line with what my students are experiencing and engaging with every day, right? So like as higher ed folks, we know that student affairs is, you know, sort of the other half of the conversation within the study, right, in the practice of higher ed. So yeah, working with student affairs folks means they work with young people. So you need to know kind of what's happening in and around young people's lives in order to be of best service to them. And I think about that pedagogically in my classroom, right? Especially for my students of color, right? In that, you know, in the academy, we don't often speak the language of each other, and we are expected to quote unquote acquiesce up, right, into the King's English in a particular kind of way. But I need to be able to make sense of theory and practice in a way that folks understand based on everyday experiences, and popular culture is a great way to do that. So, you know, coming into this particular moment, you know, I've also learned over years and trying to exercise humility that like, I don't need to say something every time something's happening. And I think that's, again, a challenge of a generation, especially when you're expected to be, you know, the smart Black person, to always have something to say. But I do find that if I take a step back and I pause, I can see the landscape of the, perspectives that are out there. Right. In the education world, we would say that's like, you're trying to survey the literature, right? What does the literature say, right? Who has written about this? What are the analyses they're offering? What are the arguments? So I kind of take it in the same approach. And then I say to myself, if I can offer something that otherwise isn't already out there, I'll say some shit. Right. Now, this intersects too with this responsibility I feel as a heterosexual cisgender Black man, right, to speak in ways that speak to people like me that maybe have a different perspective. Right. And that's when I feel like there's an impetus to say something around issues of gender, specifically around masculinity, right, and manhood, and how we construct those ideas of self, but also how we are invested in and, participatory or complicit with patriarchy in terms of how it operates, and misogyny and how it operates, right? Sort of this deep, often subconscious in some regards, but also conscious decision to be invested in the detriment of, women or men who even perform masculinity beyond the narrow confines of, what we determine that to be. So anyway, all of that's converging in this moment where I'm trying to, think of myself as someone who can help connect dots and facilitate learning, which isn't about necessarily being expert because I know everything, but I am seeing what's happening, and I need to make these connections because I don't think these things are unrelated. And I know that often the easier route is to look at things in isolation, right? But what happens when we look at them all together and we start when we say we want an analysis of systems, structures, right? This is a system and structure that's operating that people need to kind of, be up on game in the same way that somebody put me on it. And that's what basically just happened in that moment.
Okay.
Right.
And then
Absolutely.
in your thread, you go on to talk about how you connect this to what's happening in Texas right now. A lot of people in the comments didn't understand that connection. Would you be able to go a little bit more in depth into how those two connect, that pop culture and the legal side of things?
Yeah. So like my response whenever, niggas is like, it's not that deep. And I'm like, well, why isn't it?
Oh,
right. Like run it for me. Why isn't it that deep? Right. And there are a bunch of folks in the comments, mostly, again, other cis, hetero Black men, we're saying it ain't that, it ain't this or whatever. And that usually means two things. Like one, that we don't have the ability, right? We don't have the range, right, around these topics and issues.
The readings, yeah.
Right. Because if we go too deep, right, then you might drown. And that's part of the problem. Right. So I think there's that aspect of it. And again, we need to see this at the 30,000 foot level, right? So I can like try to walk us through why it is that deep. And so the connection for me was that, when we move beyond the surface, and this is an important part too, like I'm cool. Like everybody does have an opinion. Everybody got a perspective. As a scholar, right, or someone who's thought to be a sort of knowledge expert in this way, we don't have the benefit of just having opinions. And if you've ever been in a class, you know that an opinion ain't worth nothing. You need to have an analysis.
Oh.
Right. And so when we think about knowledge as a political artifact, right, a political thing that we can construct, deconstruct, and reconstruct, then we need better analyses to understand today's intractable problems. And so part of what I was trying to offer was like, all right, let's just put it in terms that make sense. Drake be riding out for Houston on a regular basis. And with all due respect, Houston be riding out for Drake, right? He's good in the street. Cool. But where is Houston located? Right. And so for all of these women, fictitious or otherwise, you listen in these songs, right, that work at the Galleria or wherever else, right, who now will be, directly impacted by the legislative decisions, because we know any law that's passed will first and foremost, be to the detriment of Black people, Black women specifically, right? Then it should be that deep to think through, right, whether I'm going to, one, decide to keep this song on my listing, because there was an argument made like Drake didn't know. Drake does know, right? Drake is involved in every single decision at every single level. So he knew, and it probably wasn't maybe a big deal to him to do this. But you're taking like a top, we'll say top 2 predators of Black women in our lifetime, and he ain't number 2, and got him on there, right? And you have a state that is now, and again, you can't forecast that this is going to happen, right, if you're Drake necessarily, but now you have a state that you say you love that is making it clear for women who need reproductive justice they can't have it. At the same time, you're elevating, right, a person who is deeply responsible for situations and circumstances, right, that put women that are already vulnerable into more vulnerable situations and have likely had to deal with some form of reproductive justice in their own lifetime. So to me, it's saying that it's not about one causing the other or not. And that got misunderstood quite a bit, right? Which is not what we're saying. We're saying that there are multiple correlations about what's happening in popular culture, what's happening in policy, right, in politics, in this particular socio-political moment. And to be sure, it's not like I'm looking to rappers to be like, the social justice warriors of our day. I don't think that's the case, nor should it be. Right? They're people and have a full range to exist and how they want to exist. But let's not act like it don't mean nothing, because the main point of the tweet, which is like later down, right, is like a lot of Black men do take their cues from folks like this. So if I'm that person, I feel like you should have a responsibility to do and say something, better that moves us all forward. But even more so, we should always like hold to the light and interrogate, right, what these things actually are and how they're affecting us, and to understand them at the level we are, where we, in the academy don't have to engage with this stuff. But I know that like when I go to the barbershop, this is a conversation I'm fitting to have.
Absolutely.
Right. So I got to be like able to know like, well, what value is the thing that I've learned to do in this space? And if it ain't in service to helping Black people be better and get freer, then it's not really worth that much, because I can't do that just writing journal articles or teaching like, a prestigious institution that most niggas don't have access to. Right. I got to do that shit in Saturday school, at the barber shop, right. Pulling the young brother to the side when I see him, on the street or whatever. And that's the responsibility I want us as Black men who benefit from male privilege, right. Cis privilege, if you're cis, heterosexual privilege, if you identify as straight, to take up more seriously the responsibility that we have to hold each other accountable, and not just thinking about fighting white supremacy from our vantage point. Because a lot of Black men are invested in defeating white supremacy only so they can replace their oppressor, right? Have a version of male supremacy. And this is what Bell Hooks teaches us, right? This is what Kimberly Crenshaw teaches us. And so that for me is like where the impetus for a lot of the work happens. And then just trying to find iterations, tweeting being one of them, to be a space where that can actually take place.
Absolutely. And you know what? I love that point that you made about us getting so deep in the knowledge that like there's a fear that we can drown, right? So like I remember I had already listened to Certified Lover Boy all the way through before I even heard about the R. Kelly situation and him getting the writing credit. And for me, I'm finding out, all right, so it was on the intro, but it wasn't the actual song. It was someone speaking and R. Kelly was playing in the background. And so I'm just like, okay, well, how would you sort of advise a Black man who might say something to the effect of, okay, well, it seems so far removed. And if we do that, then like, all right, well, Dr. Dre, let's go there. Like, we gotta knock out Dr. Dre. We gotta knock out Nas, because they've also caused physical harm. They've also caused harm to Black women. Like, where do we stop? Because now I'm drowning. Now, Drake, maybe he has something to do with it, but like, what if he's in a situation like Kanye alleged he was in, where the label dropped the album? And would you say something to the effect of, well, actually, no, I won't ask you that. I won't ask you that yet. But how do we get into the space where we can manage the swimming in the knowledge and going deeper without drowning? Because one might say, well, it's sort of deep in the song and it's not the actual song in and of itself. R. Kelly's just sort of in the background if you listen closely, yada, yada, yada. And then how do we tap into all these other Black men who've caused violence, or all these other entities that have harmed particularly more marginalized people within the Black communities? Like, what do you say to that? Because I think it's a really, really great point. And I think there is a really big fear, and that's why people don't want to go too deep.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's why I'm not a purist about these things. I think we need to have elasticity and flexibility, right? But we also can't use that as an excuse not to hold anyone accountable for anything. Absolutely. And that's what I see it, right? And it's usually for men who also are trying to, find analogs for situations they've been in or ways they've participated or been complicit to sort of get a green light on this, like, I'm not that bad of a person, right? Which is not even the arguments being made here, right? I'm not arguing that, like, Drake in and of himself is a terrible person, right? Like, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can critique, right? Or that he individually is solely responsible, right, for that happening, right? What I am saying is at some point during the process that was clear, and this is Drake's album, and Drake is not like another artist, right, that doesn't have creative control or autonomy in the ways that some albums, end up with stuff that people don't necessarily want as a younger artist, right? And part of my saying is that it was known at some point that this was the case. Yeah. And if it was so insignificant, right, if people wanted to diminish it, then it didn't really need to be in the song, did it? Like, you couldn't find something to stand in, right? And again, drawing it back to the scholarly conversation, we make empirical and intellectual choices of who we cite, right? This is a citation practice, right, that we need to think about, because Black people have been engaged in citation for many, many years beyond the academy and the way that it decides to do that, right? And this is what sampling fundamentally is. We want to take it to the music piece.
Oh, that's a bar.
You feel me? Right? Sampling is a form of citation, right? And part of it is building on the legacy sonically of what's been provided before you, right? Which we know for sure is a Ye thing, right? Like no ID, Ye, et cetera. We could do all the derivatives of that, right? But Drake too, and he builds, 40 builds his catalog in such a way that multiple samples are used in multiple songs, even to the point where it's frustrating, right? Like, one of the things that I remain frustrated with Drake to this day, right, is having DMX open up a record, right, and then there's no more DMX on the record.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I was looking for a lot more than what I was given, even though the track is still hot. But it was like, nah, they do these, you know, there's a formula that they follow that nobody else does in the game that just gets you enticed, right? Even if the title is such that ain't got nothing to do with the song, but it's an interesting title, and therefore right? And in many ways, like CLB is a very much that, right? It's always that. Like Drake's albums are consistent in that regard. But anyway, it's a citation practice. So you make choices, which means you could have chose to keep it, you could have chose to let it go. You're obviously a genius enough to construct a record that would equally be as good, and nobody would have known. And I think it says something else to say that we started here, but we realized at the particular moment, like this is what it was, and we decided to pull the record entirely, right? Or drop that particular part of the sample and just do something else. And so, you know, I think that part is for me is to make it clear that like, no, this isn't all on Drake, but it's not on Drake either. Yeah. Right. And part of it too is that we've just normalized and diminished and minimized the types of harm and violence that become so routine and so everyday. We don't even see when they take place or happen. Right. We're just trying to find, is like our grandmamas would say, the right way to do the wrong thing. And I just don't believe that that's like a real thing that we should be doing. Right. And that's like niggas just always try to do that in any number of ways. You know, so anyway, so that was that piece. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the rest of the question. You know, we just be getting on these diatribes and just be like talking that shit. So I just make sure I'm responding fully to the question that you asked. Oh, like where do we stop? Right.
Yeah. Where do we draw that line?
Right. Yeah. And I don't know that we do or don't, right. It's that like no one is beyond reproach. And I think that starts at an understanding that all of us individually are capable of doing and receiving harm. So the question then is like, how do you actually engage in accountability and reparation and restoration, right, moving forward? Because it's not that anybody's not going to do these things. It's like, well, what do you do in the wake of that? Right. And so if I can liken this to another person that would be in a conversation, right, is Jay, right? Jay on the Kanye album, right? We sort of like, you know, thought about this as a great moment for them to come back together and all these other, you know, things, right? But if we look at Jay's career, and I had said this on like some podcasts long ago, like when 444 just came out, right? Like Jay has absolutely done all the things that regular niggas be doing. He has been more than vocal about that, right? We know that vis-a-vis Beyonce's Lemonade, right? In their context of their relationship, he continued to do those things. But what we saw a bit different from Jay, at least in 444, right, is a certain level of self-accountability and reckoning with the truths of his life, in part dealing with the things that he did to Beyonce and to other women, right? His relationship with his mother in a way that we haven't gotten. And this is a frustration I have generationally of like rappers that, you know, I've appreciated at certain different points in my life. Like certainly when Drake came out, like that's all that was being played, you know, in the club, like that's the thing that people are galvanizing around. But similarly, I often don't stay with artists that I can't grow with, right? Like that's not my circle no more, or I can just make it what it is and just like it for the sound, right? But again, for me, it's like, well, if we're evolving and developing, and to your point where we draw the line, to me, it's how do we address and take account for the things that we've done, right? In a sort of public way, right? That signal to others that there is room for evolution and growth. And this is the same thing that happened when Nipsey died, right? Like y'all were in LA when this went down, as was I. And we had to hold space for the complicated grief of Nipsey as we did for Kobe, right? Let's just like keep it a buck, right? Like, and so I can't over demonize, say, Nip, you know, for how he spoke and engaged with certain things, although I think that it could have been wrong and we should be accountable to that in the way that, you know, trans women specifically have done the work to make sure we hold that tension, right? But like the other thing is Nip came out of a certain context, so I would not expect necessarily things to be that different, and he didn't get the full, you know, version of his life to understand that in the way that would allow for him to make good on it moving forward. So that for me is where it comes down to, right? Like you don't, it's not, does Nas get a pass and R. Kelly don't? It's like, well, how are Nas and R. Kelly different? Because they are. And two, right, how have they done work to redress that? Like there is no level of redemption, you know, for anyone who can't first acknowledge the wrongdoing that they've done, the harm that they've caused. And ultimately, it's not even up for me to whether to say like whether we accept this person or not. Because if you ask me like where do we draw the line, I'm gonna tell you that like cisgender heterosexual Black men don't get to determine where that line is.
Oh, that's
right.
Ask Black women, ask Black trans folk, right? Non-binary, gender non-conforming folk, where the line is, right? And that's the problem. Part of the patriarchy in our own minds is this like over-determination of what we get to say, what counts and what don't count. And like Black women and feminist scholars have been trying to tell us like that's the wrong approach to the thing. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's about like who you're answerable to, right? Who is the community that you're answerable to? And it almost always should be the most marginalized, you know, within a particular subset. And this is what I was sort of alluding to of like why we can't get free as a people. That don't mean what we're doing and what white people are doing are the same. Or we have the same level of responsibility, right? We have different responsibilities, right? But minimally, it's that we should not engage in inflicting the same types of harm, right? as our general oppressors. I think that is like minimally what we can ask. And so that's really what it was like, the direction it was coming from, or like why I decided to do that. But I could understand there was gonna be so much pushback on it, from a very particular group. And I knew that going in, but like, I can deal with that. That's fine. Right. And if that almost always leads to an intervention for somebody, then it was worth it.
Absolutely.
Right. If you got, 200 followers on Twitter and you worried about what I'm doing, saying I'm doing this and that, whatever, like, I'm not tripping on that, bro. But if you want to have a conversation, like, let's do that. And there were other people who did want to do that. Right. Like, wait, like, tell me what you was saying. Like, I don't fully get it, but it seems like it makes sense. And that's the point for an intervention.
Yeah. And Dr. Davis, like, I really, really I love everything that you've been saying. I got a chance to dive a little deeper into your work, and I read your article, What is Misogyny and Why Black Men Should Stop Referring to Black Women as Females. Thought it was brilliant. And I thought it was just like you're kind of talking now. And it translated what it needed to real people. And I feel like a lot of academics don't do that. And that was how we started this podcast. We wanted to take these concepts and bring them to our everyday people, the people we listen to at the barbershop, right? That's cutting our hair, our friends that we grew up in the same communities with, that might not have had the chance to get to UCLA and to have these classes. So while we have you on, I would love if you were able to kind of break down a few definitions for us. I think that a lot of this conversation has had a lot to do with misogyny. It's a word that is kind of thrown around on social media, and not often is it defined. And I think that happens in the classrooms too. You have to be brave enough to say, hey, can you define this? And what does this look like on an everyday basis? I really like this quote. You says, misogyny is too easily reduced to extreme forms of how women and girls are despised and disregarded. So I guess that is a two-part question. Would you be able to define misogyny for us? And then could you kind of give us a few examples of what everyday misogyny might look like to us, so we are able to identify it?
Yeah. So first I want to shout out Black Men Build. It's an amazing organization, that's happening all across the country right now, with chapters developing every day. Shout out to Philip Agnew, to Tef Poe in St. Louis, my man Steve Pargett, Rachel Gilmer down at Dream Defenders. All the folks who are involved in, sort of the publication that's called Wartime, which is the political publication of Black Men Build. And also for them, right, just holding the space and offering me an opportunity to have a conversation. So I think part of it, and we went through iterations of this, right? Revision is the most important part of the writing process. There's no such thing as good writing, only rewriting. And going through those iterations is always helpful for me, right? As an academic who's primarily speaking to audiences that have a particular jargon, a way of understanding, some presumptions about, previous knowledge on part of the reader that doesn't always exist in the public sphere, and you have to explain yourself differently. But it pushed me even to think about, how do you constantly have a conversation about these things in ways that's non-academic and not intellectualized, but like really base level. And so part of the expose, or the essay rather, in the publication, is trying to sort of like elucidate that, right? In a way that says, like, at a base level, what are we talking about? And what are the assumptions that go into it on either end, right? What do I assume that but also what do you assume about what a thing is that maybe it isn't, right? Because like words mean things, right? We've seen this on Twitter. But also as like a, sociocultural anthropologist, I understand that language, right, takes on its own form and its own meaning in a different context, right? And we see this in the opposite way when like white people try to use words that we be using on the regular, right? And then just mess it all up, or they take it like literally, right? And it's like, nah, that's not right. But you have no sociolinguistic context, as we would say in the academy, or you don't understand what language means in the space and place and the people who use it. So, when it comes to this idea of misogyny, that's been a thing I've even wrestled with and sat with, because I think what we often try to do, right, and we see this a lot, which is still about patriarchy and control and domination, is this desire for men, and this is a great point with the Drake conversation, right? Like, certain light-skinned nigga behavior, if we can call it that, right? And the extent to which it's like, we just trying to not be, what other men are, or a lighter version of that, right? And what it does is it puts this veneer over fundamentally what is the same thing, right? It's like that. And when people say this, right, like a light skinned nigga can get away with X, Y, and Z. You can't do that if you're dark skinned, which is true in a bunch of different ways, but it includes how it is that we engage and treat women, or the types of behaviors that we expect, right? Again, based on narrow definitions of masculinity. And I think part of that is that we reduce certain types of violence, right, in this hierarchy, right? And to some extent it is, and we can name that for what it is. But I think all too often, in the same way that we will not allow racism to be reduced to a particular set of overt actions, we cannot reduce misogyny to things that only are like considered the extreme, right? Which could be sexual violence of a particular nature, right? Language of a particular sort, opposed to the everyday ways that we engage in the dismissal and disregard of women. That can be their opinions or perspectives, right? The extent to which we strip them of their agency and decisions, like what's happening in Texas, right? Or what's even happening in our interpersonal relationships. And this is, I think, the most important part, right? Misogyny does operate for sure at a systemic and, structural level. I am most concerned with how we as Black men engage in everyday misogyny with the people in our immediate proximity, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're at this moment, and we've seen this a lot with these like quote unquote relationship experts and dating gurus, right? Mm-hmm. Right, it's a bunch of Black men in marriages like cheating on their wives.
Yeah.
Right. And you saying all this stuff about what brothers should and shouldn't do. And I understand that, like, do better, than I'm doing, don't do as I do, that whole kind of thing. But like, fam, don't be out here doing all this stuff in your work and you treat your wife like garbage, right? Your mama like garbage, your daughter like garbage, right? Or allow that to be happening in a certain kind of way. And so I want us to think about this as like a set of relationships, not just a set of actions, right? And that, and my father sort of taught me very early that, like, you don't want to ever engage with a woman in a way you would not want to see me engage with their mother or someone to engage with your sister, right? Now, that's great, and it's been very helpful. But the part of that too is that we then create these exceptions, right, for who's now willing, right, or who are willing to engage in these types of practices. And this is the thing that I struggle with, even to a certain extent. One, of thinking about, when and where and how I use the B word, right, which I will call the B word moving forward, because I don't think I deserve the right to be able to articulate myself in such a way, knowing that it's a pejorative term for women. So that being said, and this is the trickiest part too, right, is our first response as Black men dealing with white women engaged in racism is going to be what? Right? We're going to dip into that misogyny bag, right?
Oh, you preaching. Oh,
now,
I'm shivering.
Now, that is what it is. And I understand that, right? We try to fight power with the power that we have. And as like men, we, again, have a certain relationship to patriarchy that allows us to do that. But what we see is that when we engage in the behaviors that white men do against women, white or otherwise, right, we will be held to a different standard and be held accountable by the carceral justice system. Even more so, the more we normalize our engagement, right, with white women who may be engaged in racism against us, with misogyny against them, right, we build a certain pattern, a certain habit of mind that says this is a normal way to engage with women generally, whether it seems intentional or subconscious, right? And so for me, I can think about this in so many different contexts when we think about the political conversation around like Hillary Clinton, for example. And they're saying like, oh, sexism is like the reason that she's not being able to be elevated, which I wholly agree with, right? And I took the position of, well, we should defend Hillary Clinton against sexism, but we should also defend Black people against Hillary Clinton.
That's a point.
That we need to be able to hold space to do both at the same time, that it shouldn't be an exchange one over the other, right? Because we fight racism not with misogyny, but with solidarity. You feel me? And so when we're talking, and so the political implications of what I've been talking about is that we can't actually build any form of racial solidarity if we are disrupting the very solidarity that we're intending to build by engaging in homophobia, by engaging in misogyny, right, by engaging in ageism, classism, so forth and so on, because the substance of Black people is multitudes. So if we don't hold space for those multitudes, right, recognize our solidarity in those multitudes, then how could we move forward as a collective, right? We could move forward with a different set of leadership, right, that still has a hierarchical structure, but we can't move forward and be free because our freedom is still predicated, right, on the harm and the subjugation of others, which always, again, tend to be Black women, Black trans folks, Black folks with disabilities, right, Black folks that are living in poverty, all these sorts of things. And so that's, again, like going back to the point, that's what it was all really about, right? And so when I come back to this thing about, misogyny, it's just all the like everyday little ways that we just do these types of things that we take for granted, right? Like men's only spaces, not that we don't need our spaces to do the certain things we need to do, right? That may be harmful to other people, and we need to reserve that to a space that's, safer for both us and them. But, are you disregarding the perspectives and opinions of women in your everyday work, right? Are you reducing the types of harm that they experience when they share these things with you as something that's otherwise insignificant, opposed to deferring to their, truth, right? Their lived experience and being the sole experts of that experience. When you're constructing this notion of what like good leadership looks like, does that include, right, the voices, representations of these other folks, right? And if it doesn't, why is that? Right. And it's not that you don't defer to that, right? I think you're socialized into thinking about that in a bunch of ways, right? If I'm asked like, oh, what scholars are doing what work, I do have to be intentional of not just naming like other Black male scholars,
Absolutely.
right? I know most of those folks and they're in my network, but I'm like, oh, there's someone else who does the same work, right? Maybe even does it better than the other person I was going to name that I need to make sure that I'm in tune with, which also then constructs for me, and this is the point I'll end on, right? How we surround ourselves in this digitally mediated moment, right? Who are you following and who are your followers? And this is a very good indication, right? At some point I realized, and we all do this Facebook purge like every election cycle, right? But when these moments happen, I be purging also, right? I'm like, oh, I outgrew this nigga. I tried to give him some space and like, we just not on the same wave. And like, I don't feel no kind of way about it. I just don't follow you no more. And when I was more intentional about curating my people that I follow, because I wanted to learn opposed to be, you know, this place where people come to feel like they can learn and I don't have space to develop as well. It was like, no, I need to be intentional of like seeking out, right? You know, folks who talk knowledgeably about these particular issues so that I can learn and do my work in my community, which is with other Black men, not so I can be out here being some expert on feminism and patriarchy. Like that ain't the goal, right? I'm not here to talk to the masses in that regard. That space should be for those in the same way that like race stuff should be the, you know, space for us. And so I wanted to curate that following so I would just be better knowledged, if I can, you know, borrow that phrasing from a former congresswoman. And then I could also see who would leave in moments that I post things that might be interpreted as controversial, right? Like, are you going to drop off when like I'm calling us out? Because that's the other thing too. When I talk about this stuff, I had to be very cognizant of not doing the you thing, right? Like y'all niggas need to get it together. It's like, no, we the collective nigga needs to get this together, right? And I'm part of that.
Absolutely.
And I think that is part of it too, of this desire not to be separate from, but included within, which means I have a greater responsibility opposed to like, yeah, all of y'all need to do this and I'm doing it. Because I pretended to be that I'm perfect. And, you know, as Cornell West would say, any moment that you feel, you know, that you're sort of like on your high horse and above yourself, you will be re-nigrified, right? And we think about niggering as a process, which means like you step out of line with white people, they're going to let you know, right? Cam Newton, you got to go, right? Whoever it is at the day. And the same thing can happen, as we've seen, right? When we step out of line thinking you got all the answers, you doing all the things right, and you slip up and like the receipts will be there because we live in a world of nothing but receipts, right? I have 87,000 receipts on Twitter, right? Just from tweeting for like the last 10 years. So somebody gonna pull them receipts, right? And that's why I think, you know, again, you know, from an accountability standpoint for us, it's like, how do you just live a more transparent life? How do you be honest about the things you've done and not done, and how you've moved on from them and how you've like tried to build, you know, better relationships, how you've engaged in repair and restoration, because that's what people want. They just don't want to be lied to, right? They don't want to be duped. We don't want people saying that like, oh, I don't benefit from massaging or I'm not massaging. It's like, of course you are. Maybe not the same level, but if we don't start where we're at, that we're all, again, capable of doing and receiving, we can't move forward in a way that's like a healing pathway for everybody.
Yeah. Dr. Davis, you've been preaching. You took us to church this fine Friday.
I just be talking, man.
Well, look, it was a good Friday. We appreciate you coming on and taking the time to share your wisdom and your knowledge with us. Is there anything else you would like to kind of say before we close out the show?
I mean, not a lot, man. I just want to, you know, encourage people that if you don't have a political home, to find one in your city. You know, all organizing is local, right? All activism is local. I talked about being in proximity, right, to your folks and taking up that arm from where you're at. So I would encourage folks to find an organization that they can be a part of, find community they can be a part of. And, you know, I would say in addition to that, just know that we are all, you know, engaged in the process of teaching and learning. And so the more that we can commit to being lifelong students and whatever our domains that we feel like we need to be better edified, right, and to know more, that we should do that, regardless if you have a PhD or you have a GED or you have no degree. Learning is a constant and continuous process, and we must always value the spaces that teach us, right, that give us education from the folks that we think that don't have none. And so I'll just kind of leave it at that. And, you know, just again, appreciate y'all for inviting me on, holding the space, let me talk my shit, and hopefully we can do it again.
Absolutely. We would absolutely love to.
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Again, just for taking the time to do what you do best. And we will see you soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I appreciate y'all.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good day.
You too.
Wow. I'm like, look, I just watched Flavor Flav a couple of days ago. Wow. Yo, like this is it. Oh, that's it. That was it. Oh, that was it.
I really appreciated the transparency thing that he talked about, right? Because that's kind of what we've been talking about over the last few days and over our episodes, right? like remaining transparent and saying, like, when we even talk about politicians, right? We talk about how we wish they would just own up to what they've done in the past, because we're all people, we've all done shitty things, right? And it's
Absolutely.
like being able to keep it a beam, like our segment says, right? To keep it a beam and say, hey, look, this is who I was, this is who I am now, but this is the process in which I've gone through, and I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and like I'm still probably gonna fuck up, but like love me because I'm gonna love you, and I'm gonna do my best to take care. So I really appreciate that, because I think that is the essence of being a human and being a good person.
Right, right, absolutely. I think there are so many great things that he said in terms of like not thinking about saying one person isn't accountable and one person isn't, but like it's
Mhm.
all about restoration, right? It's all about, all right, well, where do we go from here, right? And
Yeah,
like we're all a part of the problem. This is a collective thing. All of us are attached to each other in some way, shape, or form. And I think because I think our audience understands that, as two black hetero cis men, we prefer and choose black women. So I think
mhm,
that for me, it really hit me when he started talking about a white woman disrespecting me,
yeah.
because I had to reach into my bag, and I was just like, I don't, in my mind, mentally and emotionally, I don't mind using misogyny to address that. Or sexism, sorry,
It's the
to
bag
address
that
that.
you got. You gonna pull out that thing,
Yeah,
like,
because I'm
what's
like,
up?
how dare you? How dare you?
I'm at
But
least bring my knife to this gunfight.
right. But like but he really just made me think about like liberation sort of being the antithesis of violence that we choose, right? And so like I can choose sexism or heterosexism or ableism or classism to address someone who's white, but what does that actually do for my people?
Yeah.
Because I can't use that word or phrase or frame of thinking without hurting one of my own,
Hmm.
period. You know what I'm saying? And in a society, how can we be expected to grow together and
Yeah.
really fight against white supremacy when we're saying, oh well, you hurt me, you did scissors on me because I'm paper, so I'm gonna use rock on you because I know you're
Yeah.
scissors. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, the creator of the game is still winning. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying? and,
yes.
and I think he really made me open up my mind and think more in that vein. Like, wow, like we really and what he said about the grandma, like trying to find a good way to do a bad thing. I was like,
Yeah. No, I
don't
was
do
like,
it,
ooh.
don't do it, I just finished watching this show called F Boy Island, and what I've learned is that fuck boys really be trying to find good ways to do bad things because it's all about a strategy. It's all about a game. It's all about your ego. And it's just like, as black men, how do we like challenge ourselves? Because I think even when he was talking about Drake, he was talking about like, you're a creative genius.
Yeah.
Like you and 40 creative geniuses, you can't tell me that you couldn't have found a way to like
Figure this
make
out.
up for that. Or even if you had to scrap something at the very last minute, like
Yeah.
you could have found another way. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned about Donda, right? Where it's like, Ye is so incredible. If he acknowledges what he does, he's done wrong, and he does that self-acknowledgement, what he could create could be so great. And if Drake
Yeah.
at 40, whoever was involved in CLB, takes that time to be like, like, yikes, we can't have that on this song. Like
Yeah.
we can't do that. It because it seems minor, but it's not minor for somebody. It's not
Mhm.
minor for someone that we think about not only as our people, but as our audience. You know what I'm saying? Like black women stand for Drake. So it's
Yeah.
just like, how do we tap into our creative juices to bring something even more powerful for the people that we claim to love and who love us? And so so grateful that we had him on the show. And like this is an open letter to our black women, our black trans women, and our black hetero cis men in particular. Like, what can we do? Because I feel
Yeah.
like as he was talking, it was just like, this is what we stand for: the
Yeah.
collective accountability of like hetero cis black men in particular. Right. This was an actual segment of building a better brother.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
actually literally got to see three black men converse on how we can be better as people, not just y'all, us.
Yes, us. Yes, I love that point. And I guess my final thing that I just want to leave y'all with is that, like, even even understanding that Drake made this mistake, I think that what I got from Dr. Davis is that, like, yeah, okay, he made this mistake, and maybe that's not the end all be all. He caused this harm. It's acknowledging that harm that you caused. And yeah, maybe understanding you didn't know where that line was drawn, right? That you sampled somebody that happened to sample R. Kelly. And no, like, that doesn't make you the worst person. I think that that's where everybody wanted to be like, oh, no, this tweet don't make sense, or no, it ain't that deep. But it's knowing that you've caused harm and how can you rectify that. And I think that that's the one piece that's missing. It's like, yeah, you still made the decision to sample R. Kelly, and maybe we didn't know exactly how that was going to go, but this is how people felt, and these are people echoing that they feel the pain and the hurt, and that you it seems as if you're standing by it. Like 40 came out and said it, but Drake never came out and said anything about it. And I think it's, again, standing on your two and be like, yeah, I fucked up on that one. I didn't know. I not that I didn't know that this was the sample, but I didn't know that this was the harm that I was going to cause. I think that that's more than enough to know that, like, this is genuine. And I think that that's the one thing that we're missing. And I just appreciate Dr. Davis for coming through and just, dropping that thing, boy. Like, yeah.
No, absolutely, T. Because I feel like what I think another, it's like a 2-part piece, right? So it's like, how does Drake acknowledge what he did? But then us as a community, right? How do we come at him and say, hey, look, I don't really agree with this. This is the harm you caused. But then also come back and say, and this is probably more work for Black hetero cis men, because, like, we don't need to oppress people doing all the work. But, like, this is a suggestion, Drake. Have you thought about doing this instead? Mm-hmm. Have you thought about doing that instead? Because there are different levels. Like, Drake isn't R. Kelly, right? So so we'll acknowledge that. But at the same time, we can it's not just criticism or love. It's a beautiful mixture of both.
Yes.
Right. It's that, hey, look, oh, you shouldn't have done that, bruh. Maybe this is what you should do. Maybe this is what you should say. Maybe this is how you can rectify this situation, either right now and in the future. And I don't think that people know how to give great responses on social media. It's either you really fuck with the person or you really don't fuck with the person. And it's just like, if we can't live in this space where we can recognize the different levels of harm and address it accordingly, but address it still, then we're lost. And I think that he made that perfect point. I think you make a great point in terms of Drake's part in that. So, man, that was a treat. That was a treat.
Straight treat, bro.
Yeah, man. So shout out to Dr. Davis again. We're definitely going to be getting y'all out some clips on the socials. So stay tuned for that for sure. And we're coming up on our spotlight, our final section of the pod. All right. So our spotlight acknowledges people who have done something good in society. So we know we start you off with the light roast, critiquing someone, but we like to end things on a positive note because there is positivity somewhere in this world, if you can believe it. Okay, so our spotlight for today has to do with Richmond, Virginia, taking down its statue of Robert E. Lee, who was a famous Confederate soldier. And it's a huge moment because black boys and girls, indigenous boys and girls, like they can actually grow up in a world where a villain and a terrorist is not even is not propped on a pedestal to be celebrated. And to think like 5 years from now, if I move to Virginia and my children are growing up and they won't have to look at Robert E. Lee and all his glory. You know what I mean? They won't have to deal with that. It won't be some type of ancestral triggering every time they walk past him. It's such a big moment. And I think that for some people, they have the pride of the South and things of that nature, but we have to recognize, like we were talking about before, these different boundaries of terrorism, honestly. Absolutely. And we have to realize that this man was propped up to be celebrated, even though he was a terrorist, right? And so we have to remember that, and we have to appreciate these moments, because now kids will grow up in a world, and adults who might have great grandparents or grandparents who were negatively impacted by Robert E. Lee. They won't have ancestral triggering anymore. You know what I'm saying? Or they can start to deal with that or not be triggered all the time anymore. So it's just a beautiful moment because it also sets the stage for other statues and to be removed and other names to be removed and just terrorists being removed and erased like they should be, right?
Absolutely.
So
And when I think about statues too, like those are literally pillars of history, right? Like those statues stand the test of time. So when in 100 years, like when all things have kind of crumbled, statues often still exist. And I actually talked to my class about this yesterday. In the moment, I started to really start to think. Like, I asked them a question. I said, "How many black men or black people with statues do you know specifically?" Right? Like, we know that there's a white supremacist like pillarized in Richmond, Virginia, and now it finally got pulled down. But like, how many black people? Right? I can think of. I think Shaq got one outside of Staples. Michael Jordan got one outside of the Bull Stadium, and I know there's that one of Martin Luther King. I don't know no other statues. I don't know if you do, but like I think that says something, right? Like these are the only ways that we can like be exalted into history. But the people that terrorize us like are forever held in that light. And Richmond, Virginia is not just, I mean, it's just one place. Like all throughout the South, there are monuments of different varieties, not just statues, but pillars and acknowledgments to the history of white supremacy and the history of the South. There's more. They were talking about this. I read this book. It's in Cast, and she was discussing how Nazi Germany had there was a lot of different things up for Nazi Germany, but Germany has gotten rid of all of that and they've replaced it with like monuments and remembrances to the lives that were lost during the Holocaust. And I think that we should kind of keep that in mind and hopefully replicate that same type of process that yeah, while we are continuing to break these things down, it's like abolition democracy to me. As we deconstruct these systems and get rid of these statues, we need to reconstruct in that same space because that empty spot, like people will still know that was Robert E. Lee. But if we reconstruct it and put Sojourner Truth there, or Harriet Tubman, or Nat Turner, or shoot anybody, right? Like then we can put bell hooks up there. Like I don't know, it forces people to start to look at history different, and I think that we have a real place in history that should be rectified, and I think that this is a great opportunity to do so.
absolutely, yeah, because because going to your point, it's a different type of history that you start to remember when you see heroes. Because when you see the heroes glorified, you get to explain why the heroes are glorified versus when you have the terrorist up, you're censoring the terrorist. And when the terrorist is up there, someone can make them out to be a hero and justify, look how big that statue is. Wasn't he a hero? Right. But when Harriet's up there, when Nat, oh my gosh, whenever they put a Nat Turner up, oh, I'm going. I don't care what city he's in. Oh, I'm going to visit that one. But that's for another podcast. We'll talk about why Ashton loves Nat Turner. But I'm working on it. Dr. Davis got me working on the violence that I choose. Lord knows. Anywho, that was a great episode. Thank y'all so much for listening. Thank you again to Dr. Davis. Man, T, I'm overwhelmed in the best way. Like it was such a good show.
I can't wait to re-listen to this episode. I think I'm gonna learn even more. I hope that the masses rock with this one because I think that this one I think it's endemic. Like it shows as a great example of our growth. And I see more of this to come, and I hope to have Dr. Davis on again in the future. But this is, I think, a building a better brother episode, and I think that when he was talking about like our population and our audience, right? Like it makes me feel good that knowing that a little over half of our listeners are women. So it reminds me that we are doing something right. He talked about how you like, who are you following? Who are your followers? Right. So I think that that's just something to kind of keep in mind for everybody. And it's a good way to kind of like do a check and balance on yourself. But yeah, thank y'all for rocking with us. So I guess I can take us out. Do you have any other last words, Scholar P?
Nah, man, it's good, man. We good, baby.
All right. So, and we're going to try to keep the episodes a little shorter, but I think these last two were treats and there was information that we otherwise wouldn't have. But
Yes.
like we like to say, keep the coffee black.
Black.
And we like our podcast like we like our women.
Black.
All right, y'all. Thank y'all for rocking with us, and we will see y'all soon. Peace.